This man gained the nickname Hannibal the Cannibal as it was initially believed that he ate part of his victims' brains. Deemed so dangerous, prison wasn't enough to stop him murdering, and since 1983 he has served his sentence in a glass bulletproof cell alone. My name's Emma, this is Tiki Bar True Crimes, and I'd like to tell you the case of Robert Maudsley. Robert Maudsley was born in Liverpool in 1953. He is the fourth child of 12 siblings. At just 6 months old, his parents were unable to cope, so him and 3 of his brothers were sent to live in a Catholic orphanage called Nazareth's House. Robert and his brothers formed a close bond and they were happy at this orphanage. The nuns took great care of them, were very loving. It was a very warm place to be. Aged 8, the decision was made that Robert and his brothers were to move back in with his parents. He didn't want to return home with his parents. He had spent the majority of his life in this orphanage and was very happy there. Despite this, the decision was upheld and Robert returned. The Maudsley household was a cold and uncaring place. This was a far cry from the warmth and loving orphanage that Robert had come from. Robert's parents neglected their children, and in a short period of time, this neglect turned into physical abuse. Robert's father would beat him with whips, belts, and even shot him with an air rifle. Robert also later claimed that his father S.A.'d him. Robert states that this harrowing physical abuse caused unhealable psychological scars and was arguably the catalyst for Robert's descent into wickedness. Robert's brother actually made a statement. He said, "At the orphanage we all got on really well. Our parents would come to visit, but they were just strangers. The nuns were our family and we all used to stick together. Then our parents took us home and we were subjected to physical abuse. It was something we'd never experienced before. They just picked on us one by one, gave us a beating and sent us off to our room. The worst, however, was reserved for Robert. All I remember of my childhood is the beatings. Once Robert was locked in a room for 6 months and my father only opened the door to come in and beat him 4 or 6 times a day. He used to beat Robert with sticks or rods, and once he shot an air rifle all over Robert's back." Robert spent just over a year with his biological parents, and then the decision was made by social services to remove him and place him with a foster family. No one really knows why Robert was singled out, why his siblings were left in the care of their biological parents, but the decision was made and Robert was transferred to a foster home. After he was removed, Robert's father told the rest of his family that Robert had died. Robert remains with this foster family for just over 5 years, and when he turns 16, he runs away to London. By this point, Robert is very suicidal and tries to take his own life on multiple occasions. Because of this, he is sent to see a doctor, and it's there that he confesses that he hears voices in his head telling him to kill his parents. He later states that if he was just allowed to kill them, none of the other murders would have taken place. Alone and suicidal, Robert turns to drugs, and in order to support his drug addiction, he becomes a sex worker. And this is when we come across our first victim. Now I'm going to use victim lightly here and you'll see why. In 1974, aged 21, Robert picks up a client, John Farrell. After having sexual intercourse in return for payment, 30-year-old John Farrell then pulls out pictures of children he has abused. Robert's childhood was full of abuse, and on hearing these stories and seeing these pictures, he goes into a fit of rage and garrots this man. He is stabbing him repeatedly and smashing him over the head with a hammer. Afterwards, he knows he's done wrong and he turns himself in to police. He also admits that he has mental health problems, that he's hearing voices. They end up nicknaming Robert Blue because when they came across John Farrell, that was the colour of his face. This was an horrific murder, but the victim wasn't innocent. In the March of that year, 1974, Robert is declared unfit to stand trial, and he is sent to spend the rest of his days in Broadmore Hospital. And this is a hospital for the criminally insane. So you think that's it. He's murdered someone, he's now incarcerated in a hospital for the criminally insane, he's under special psychiatric care. However, Broadmore Hospital isn't a prison, and it used to be known under a different name, Broadmore Lunatic Asylum. In recent years, it's come to light that the security and safety of patients, particularly in the 60s and 70s, wasn't prioritised. For example, the very famous Jimmy Savile would often visit Broadmoor on many occasions for kind of publicity reasons. This was mainly during the 60s and the 70s. He was allowed to go into patients' rooms by himself. It was later discovered that he SA'd many patients on numerous occasions. It was discovered that there were many inappropriate relationships between staff and patients. This led over the years to them only accepting men. However, as recently as 2010, a female member of staff was charged for an inappropriate relationship with a patient. This place also housed the worst of the worst, and that includes murderers and sex offenders of children and adults. Now, given Robert Maudsley's past, the motive for the murder he committed, this probably wasn't the best place for him to be. And one day he decides that he's going to take matters into his own hands, and he's going to deliver the justice that he believes should have been served. 3 years into his stay in 1977, Robert Maudsley, along with fellow patient David Cheeseman, who was in there for SAing a 16-year-old girl, go into a cell with child molester David Francis. Robert and David Cheeseman barricade the door and proceed to torture 26-year-old David Francis for 9 hours. All the while, the guards are trying to get in. They're ramming this door. It's not working. It's not coming down. It was a slow and torturous death. They used wires to tie him up, and when they were finally done, they held up his lifeless body so that the staff could see his corpse through the peephole in the door. When the staff finally got into this cell, they found Robert holding a metal spoon with something on it. The guard asked him, "What's that?" And Robert said, "Oh, it's David Francis's brain." He had sharpened the end of a metal spoon and plunged it multiple times into the victim's brain. And these actions didn't instantly kill him. They were just a continuous form of torture, plunging this sharpened metal spoon into this 26-year-old man's head. And each time they would pull it out, bits of brain would come out with it. This is also where we see rumours start to speculate that Robert ate his victims' brains. It was later revealed to be a complete myth. The autopsy showed no evidence of that. The newspapers got hold of these rumours though and dubbed Robert Maudsley Hannibal the Cannibal, despite the evidence suggesting otherwise. He was convicted of murder and sent to Wakefield Prison. He vowed that he would return to Broadmoor. He didn't want to go to Wakefield at all. Robert is deemed untreatable and given a life sentence in Wakefield Prison. Wakefield is another high security prison and it mainly houses murderers. It's actually got the nickname Murder Mansion. However, despite being placed in this high security prison, within weeks, Robert manages to kill 2 inmates in one day. His plan was actually to kill 7, but he ended up with just 2. 46-year-old Stanley Darwood was a prisoner there. He had been convicted for SAing and murdering his wife. At the time, Darwood was actually teaching Robert Maudsley French. On one occasion, Maudsley invited him into his cell when he proceeded to grab Stanley and smash his head repeatedly against the cell wall before stabbing him multiple times with his makeshift dagger. Once dead, he hid Darwood's body under his bed. He then tried to entice other prisoners into his cell, either to murder them or to show off about what he'd done. They all refused, so he went out on the prowl, looking for his next victim. He ended up in one of the wings and came across William Roberts. 56-year-old William Roberts was a convicted sex offender. He had SA'd a 7-year-old girl. He entered William Roberts' cell and proceeded to stab him multiple times. Once dead, Robert calmly left and walked up to the guard's office, placed his bloody makeshift dagger down on the desk and said, "There'll be 2 less at roll call tonight." After this, Robert Maudsley is deemed too dangerous for even prison, so they begin to build a special cell in the basement of Wakefield Prison just to house him. This 18-foot by 15-foot cell has its own team of officers guarding it. He has a table and chair made of cardboard, a bed that's just a slab of concrete. The lavatory and the sink are bolted to the floor. Robert is watched through a bulletproof glass window and given food through a small slot at the bottom. He is kept there for 23 hours a day. He is allowed 1 hour out, and you have to pass through 17 steel doors between his cell and the outside world. Even within this 1 hour, he has no other inmates to talk to. This is another reason as to why he is dubbed Hannibal the Cannibal, as his situation is very similar to Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs. Initially, Robert objected continuously to his situation. He said that all his victims were sex offenders and a danger. Over the years, he has appealed to be released from solitary. He's also asked for a pet budgie, a TV just to see what's going on in the outside world, and some toiletries. All were denied. When they denied him a pet budgie, he questioned why, as he already shares his cell with spiders and cockroaches. He promised not to eat it and to take good care of it. When all of his requests were denied, he asked for a cyanide pill so that he could take his own life. Again, this was rejected by the courts. After this, it seems as though Robert has given up and kind of accepted his fate. He says it's akin to being buried alive. Having now spent 40 years in solitary confinement, it's unimaginable what this has done to his mind. Robert Maudsley actually has a very high IQ, and he's been left with no entertainment, no one to talk to for decades. Arguably, some believe that this is inhumane. Certain members of his family certainly think so. His brother, he states that you can't put someone in solitary for decades and expect him to have the same social skills as a normal human being. The prison argues that there's no alternative and believes that Maudsley should be kept in solitary until he dies. Robert has lost all hope, stating that all I have to look forward to is further mental breakdown and possible suicide. In many ways, I think this is what the authorities hope for. That way, the problem of Robert John Maudsley can be easily and swiftly resolved. Police Detective Paul Harrison recalls his interview with Maudsley, stating, "You've got the image of a monster, a horrible, evil man. He's got this reputation that's been perpetuated by the service. I'd got all these preconceived ideas, but when we were communicating, I could understand why he did what he did. If you didn't know him and what he'd done, and you saw him in the bar, he's a really intelligent, clever guy who made you smile. He'd talk about everyday things. A lot of serial killers are really intense and narcissistic and talk about themselves, and I didn't find him like that at all. He's the only one where I actually thought, wow, this is something different to any serial killer. Maudsley is different. Although Robert Maudsley did appeal his decision to be in solitary, he also admitted that if he were put on a wing with child sex offenders, he would murder again. Age 70, having now spent the majority of his life in solitary confinement in a cell in the basement of Wakefield Prison, hidden away from society, it does beg the question as to whether this is truly fair. Robert's murders weren't done for sexual pleasure or narcissism, as we see in other cases like Myra Hindley, Ian Brady, or the Yorkshire Ripper, who had this godlike complex. They were done more as a kind of vigilante execution. These were men that had committed horrific crimes against children, and Robert saw it as just fair justice that they should be tortured and murdered. However, knowing that if Robert were to be put on a wing with any of those men, he would murder again, we're left with the question as to what is an appropriate alternative. My name's Emma. This has been the case of Robert Maudsley. If you like my content, please remember to like, subscribe and comment, and I will see you in the next one.